A ghost in the stockroom. Hello, my name is Gladius. I'm a recently retired worker in a large retail store. My story happened in that store. Back in the morning of September 6, 1999, I went to take my break in the store's own cafeteria. The person who attended me was a really nice man named Bobby, a man everyone liked and respected as a coworker. I paid Bobby with a $5 bill, and he gave me change for a 20. I pointed out the mistake, and we both laughed as he said, "Do you see what happens when you drink too much?" 20 minutes later, I hear a desperate page from the garden shop to management to immediately come. Bobby killed himself. Due to marriage problems, Bobby was gone. About a month later, strange things started happening. Here's one example. The store had a night stocking crew, and a new worker had followed a man from the cafe stockroom out onto the sales floor, telling the man the store was closed. The man turned around and said he worked there, only to disappear in front of his eyes. Needless to say, the stockman quit the next morning. He was at the front door first to leave. There has been more sightings of Bobby, mostly in the night. No one is frightened due to how much of a nice man and coworker Bobby really was. This is my true ghost story. A phone call from a dead friend. On October 15th, 3 years ago, I and two friends drove to Boise, Idaho, so that I could have an open heart surgery. I needed to have 4 bypasses done as my arteries were 90% plugged. When we arrived in Boise, we had to find a motel room to stay in overnight, as I had to be at the hospital at 6 a.m. the next morning. My mom and brother were also going to be there, but they would arrive a couple hours later. We found a motel and checked in. We went to the room and took in our things for the night. We were sitting in the room for about 20 minutes when the phone rang and my care provider answered it. She got a funny look on her face and she said the phone was for me. No one knew where we were staying, as I had not contacted anyone to let them know where we were staying. So I took the phone and a Spanish-sounding voice on the other end asked if it was me. I said yes, and he said, "Don't have your surgery tomorrow. It's not your turn to die." I was floored. No one that knew I was to have my surgery had been contacted. I asked, "Who is this?" And he said, "It's Oscar." The only person I knew by that name had died the year before of cancer. I had worked with him at the factory, and he would stop every shift and talk to me. In the background, I could hear hundreds of voices, and I asked him where he was at, and he said, "I am in between heaven and earth." Then he told me again not to have my surgery, as it was not my turn to die, and the connection went dead. I could hardly believe that this had actually happened, and I told my friends about the phone call. I called my brother and told him about the call. They were still about an hour away from Boise. He knew this friend as he worked at the same factory as we did. He told me that I better take the call seriously, and they would see us in a little while and we would go eat. We discussed the phone call over dinner, and my brother and my mother both agreed that I had better talk to my doctor about it, at least about my concern. The next morning, we went to the hospital just before 6 a.m. and they started getting me ready. I asked to see my doctor and they told me he would be there in a few minutes. I looked through the door a few minutes later and he was pacing back and forth in tight circles in front of my door. Then he came in, and before I could tell him what had happened, he said that my surgery had been postponed for a week, and that the head doctor of the department would be in to see me in a few minutes. When the other doctor came in, he told me that the doctor that was scheduled to do the surgery had lost the last 3 patients, and they were all from my area. He had rescheduled my surgery for 1 week later, and that he would be doing the surgery. 1 week later, I had the surgery and went through it without any problems. I thank God that he allows our friend to warn us when it's not our turn to die yet. I also thank God for giving me a second chance and for giving us friends that care enough to change the future. Saw my old friend, but had no idea he had died. I'm Lauren. I'm from Cape Town. So great to see locals here too. I'm new to this site and am enjoying reading all the stories and experiences. Here is my experience of not seeing a ghost, but rather a visit from an old friend. I was around 12 years old when this happened. I am now 24 years old. My dad had fetched me from school in Pinelands, and we were driving home. I remember driving past the canal. Those who know the area will now know what I'm talking about. A bridge over a long canal in the area, to those that don't. Walking on the sidewalk I saw was an old friend of mine. I hadn't seen it in about a year or so, Nathan. We used to live in the same complex, spend time together every single day. I remember once, he even took me under a tree outside his house and kissed me on the cheek. We were just friends and also very young, but I had a strong fondness of him. Anyways, so I saw him walking in his school uniform with his bag on his back, and as we drove past, he waved at me and smiled. I waved back, so happy to see him again, and I recall saying, "Hey, there's Nathan," but don't think my dad heard me. When I got into my mother's house, where I was being dropped off, I rushed to my mom to tell her that I had just seen Nathan now, as she also knew him well when we stayed at our old complex. She then looked at me and waited until my dad had left. She then took me to her room and was very, very sad. She picked up a printed photo of Nathan with text, and it looked like that of a memorial invite. I didn't understand and was like, but I just saw him. She then explained to me that it was a few weekends ago, while I was at my dad's house, that Nathan had been away with his friend and friend's father at some power line place, and he had gone up to one of the power lines. He touched it and was shocked to death. It's a horrific thing to have happened to him and his family, and for the friend's father, I'm sure. It was apparently his funeral that weekend, that very weekend, and they had just received the invite. She had phoned to send her condolences, and his dad told my mother what had happened. It was weird at the time for me to wrap my head around it, as I'd never lost anyone close to me before. I still know that we had a special bond, and that he had come back to me that very day and to say one final goodbye. And for that, I'll never forget that. I can still remember every detail of seeing him that day. So, anyone else have these experiences?